change my love the way that you do.
This is the story of a lost neighborhood and of its people who did not want to go.
I don't want no money. I want my home. The old man is old. See how the old man is old? And I'm old. That's enough. I don't want to get out. I said to my two daughters, they don't want to get out too because they spend a lot of money. Plenty of money they spend in this place. We're not getting out for nobody. Never.
Hi, welcome to the West End Video Newsletter. Tonight we're going to talk about the old West End again. I have with me Santo Aurelio. Sometimes he's called Joe, and sometimes he's called Santo.
That's right.
Which do you prefer?
Either. It
Okay.
really doesn't matter.
Anyways, tonight we've had him on the show before. He's written a book on literature, not literature, but actual grammar, and you know how to use it. And we did a show, I guess, about a year ago.
Yes, it was.
And tonight he gave me some material for the West End Museum, and he's also written for the newsletter, my newsletter, many times. He used this, what was it, thesis, right?
Yes.
He used this thesis, and it's long, so we like sort of serialize it, and we put it in when there's a good break. We run it, and everybody seems to like the stories. Somebody in the last issue just mentioned that they like the way you write, if I remember
They
right.
did. The person mentioned that he should write a book.
Yeah, and that's and so we have him writing. We're serializing his thesis, and he keeps going. He's a man of very talents. He's good with English, and he goes all over the country giving tours, not tours, lectures.
I've been very fortunate. Certain court reporting organizations throughout the United States have invited me to speak on English, grammar, and also punctuation. And so I've done that in, let me see, states of Virginia, Pennsylvania, Washington, D.C. I'm going to Arizona in a few days, and I've been to New Jersey and Connecticut.
Key West.
Yeah, that's right. And I've had lots of fun. And it's a good crowd. And they're very, very concerned about English.
Well,
and I am too.
Yeah. They have to be, because when you write something in court, it has to be precise, because it can mean somebody's freedom, or it can be property, the way that property damage is.
That's
spread.
true.
So it has to be precise.
Yeah, court reporters work in court, and they take trials relative to criminals, or when I say criminals, I meant criminal defendants, in a criminal case, and also civil cases. So whether it's civil or criminal, you really want to be sure to get every single word, and that's what a court reporter does.
I assume even the missing, even the misplacing of a comma or a dot can cause extreme trouble.
Oh, very, very much so.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Anyways, when you did your thesis, that was about the West End. That was when you came to us. It was. I don't know where we are anymore with that. I don't know how far we're into it. Because what I do is I give the typesetter a lot of leeway. I said,
yes.
Take a little fit in the paper, and when you come to a break where we can break it,
yes,
break it. So
they broke it at a very good spot this time, and I wouldn't be surprised if when next it comes out that would complete it, or maybe just two more times. So in other words, just one more part, or maybe two more parts. But it was very interesting. I ended off with a very fascinating individual, a fellow who lived across the street from us. We lived on 18 Ashland Street in the West End, and his name was Tabashnik.
Oh.
And I'm not sure of his first name. I don't think I ever knew it, but
Al.
he lived across Al.
Al.
He was a very, very fascinating guy. He could sing, he could orate, he made long speeches, he could whistle, and a good whistler, and he could sing, and he could do everything, and play the violin. And I remember one day that he evidently was being evicted. And he lived, I think, on the third floor across the street. He lived on Chambers Street, probably around number 153 or so. And he was being evicted, and then I saw his bed came out, including the bed spring. And this is a true story. And then I saw him shaking the bed springs, and I said, what is he doing? And then I noticed hundreds, if not thousands, of bugs. And I was, at the time, I was on the second or third floor, looking down, and I could see the bugs with my eyes. And evidently his bed springs were just filled with these hundreds, if not thousands, of insects. And so whenever I talk about Tabashnik, it's with a lot of nostalgia because he was an interesting character.
Oh, very much so. There's a whole lot of stories about him. And,
Yes.
and the kids, they used to call him ALT for the house, you know, Al Tabashnik.
Oh,
ALT for the house, what house?
They say, right, they say he was a college graduate and very intelligent, that he worked too hard, studied too hard, had a breakdown, and now people made fun of him.
Yeah, he could have been bipolar or something. And in those
Could have
days,
been, yeah.
And in those days, people just looked at people that had mental problems. And of course, on the other hand, the West End, we had a whole host of strange characters, and I've written about them in earlier editions. When I first started, we went through all the early editions of Governor and Goldie, and there's a whole host of them that Showstack but Tabashnik was probably, and I always thought it was with a K, but it's with a T.
Really?
Yeah, it's a T-A-B.
Yes.
Okay, and I always thought it, phonetically, you know, it's Kabashnik.
Yeah.
But you pronounce it like a K. And I always thought his name, and Frank Levine wrote a story once into West Ender where all these small shuls in the West End, you know, when they came to the high holy days, they really couldn't afford to have somebody come in and sing. And they used to get Tabashnik, because he had a clear, beautiful voice.
Yes.
But the problem was they never knew if he would show up or not. And if he showed up, right, it was beautiful. But if he didn't show up, it was just over.
Well, I think the main synagogue was right up the street, probably 300-400 feet, maybe, from his house.
Yeah, but that was those are the main ones. There was the one, I forgot the name of the one on Chambers Street, but there was the one that was on North Russell Street, which is interesting because it was built where originally I think it was what is that? An Episcopal church was. And the church either burnt down or got torn down, and they built the North Russell synagogue on that ground. And you know, there's a whole host of stories about Kabashnik. And these little shuls, there were a lot of them around there. You know, like, matter of fact, the Vilna Shul, you probably heard about it in the paper. Well, the Vilna Shul originally started as a little shul on Wall Street, and then moved up to the hill, and then they built that place.
Yeah.
So it was like a lot of these things started in, you know, out of the Jewish community as small little places, and then, you know, some died and some went on to work.
I remember Wall Street. In fact, we lived on Wall Street back, it must have been 1934.
Yeah.
I was about 2 years old.
I was born on Wall Street.
Really?
Yeah, 10
Near
Wall.
Louis' variety store?
I have no idea. We moved when I was 10 months old. When I was 10 months old, all I know was on my birth certificate.
Yeah.
I look at my birth certificate and it says 10 Wall Street. And I guess we originally moved into the West End. We originally lived on Lowell Street, and we moved to Wall Street. And then from Wall Street, we moved up to Poplar Street, and I was there till they tore the West End down.
Lowell Street, they had a lot of antique stores, I recall, on Lowell Street. And it was always a dark street because of the overhead line. It was really quite remarkable, some of the things that happened. I remember when the people would deliver ice and oil, and a lot of us had ice boxes as opposed to refrigerators, so my mother would buy a block of ice, and of course the guy wouldn't know how much we wanted to buy, so there was a little card, and the card was maybe 10 inches square, and it would have a number that one could read from, certainly 100 feet away, and it would say 10 cents or 20 cents or 30 cents or 40 cents. So depending on what size my mother wanted, she would put that in the top, in let's say the 12 o'clock area. And then the guy would come up with the ice. It'd have a rubber, like a rubber cape on his back, and then put the ice on that. This way it wouldn't wet his shirt. And as for the oil people, we worked, my mother, I think, had the Kelowna company of people. And you remember Jerry Kelowna, the comedian with Bob Hope?
Yeah.
Well, it was his family, only, you know, Jerry did not deliver oil. He became a comedian. But it was a nice family.
He's related to the Kelowna. We have an attorney. No, we don't have an attorney.
Oh, yes.
The West End has an attorney, Tom Kelowna, and he was related to the family. I think his father was the oil guy, if I remember right.
Really?
I may have it a little wrong, but his father was the oil guy, but they were related to Jerry. Jerry was like, I forgot, cousins or something. I don't remember.
He was a good comedian,
we had Tom on the show way back. That was,
really?
Yeah, well, we've been doing the show like 14 years, 18 years.
Wow, that many years.
And so it's, we've gone over the years.
The years just keep rolling along. I remember, in fact, I think there's an advertisement of Tom, and he's an attorney, and in the paper.
Right.
It's
And I've always, getting back to Kabashnik, I always wanted, I wrote this little thing way back when I had, when we were doing just the Xerox copied papers, and I said,
yes.
Fiddler on the Stoop.
Oh, that's
West
a good
End's legendary entertainer, A.L. Kabashnik, right? Reprises his role.
That's right. And you remember the clubs in the West End?
Oh, yeah, all clubs.
There was the West End House. I learned how to box and play basketball and tumble there.
Okay.
You know, tumble.
They had great basketball teams, too.
Yeah, and then there was the Elizabeth Peabody House,
right.
Settlement House on
Charles
Street.
Yeah.
And Leonard Nimoy
Right.
was in some plays there.
It's funny because I had Ray Flynn on the show about 3 months ago, maybe 4 months.
Yes.
And we were sitting there talking. We were talking about, Ray used to play for the South Boston Settlement House. So they used to
I
play,
didn't know that.
Yeah, they used to play with the, against the West End House and everything.
I didn't know
And he was sitting here and he goes, there was the Moore family, a black family from the West End that lived on the hill.
Yeah.
And we were sitting there, we were about 4 minutes into the show, and he says, by the way, how's Aldy Moore? I saw he's my brother, Sonny's brother. I said, he's in Rochester, he's still well and good and everything. But that's, Ray was, one of those guys. I mean, he came out of Southie, and, he has the same kind of, we've all had that same kind of, what's the word I'm looking, culture, okay?
Yes.
Neighborhood culture that
bet.
has so much changed in the last 40 or 50 years. Now everybody's not in my neighborhood culture, yuppies and that type of thing. But Ray was still...
Ray Flynn did well. He went to, I know he got his
Providence.
master's from Providence.
He
I don't know where
basketball. He
got-
played basketball at Providence.
And I was going to ask, so
Yeah.
that's pretty good. So he must have been a pretty good basketball
The reason
player.
I know is both my kids went to Providence.
Really?
Graduated from Providence, yeah.
Oh.
And when he was still mayor, he went down there and he gave the, the graduation
Oh,
talk
that's fine,
one
yeah.
year. Yeah.
Very interesting. Do you remember the crab man in the West End?
No.
There was a guy selling crabs. He put hundreds of crabs in his push cart,
Oh, yeah.
attractively displayed, and then he'd, it must have been
Push
awfully
down
heavy.
the
He'd
street,
push
yeah.
that push cart
With
all
the
over the
row.
place, and it'd say, crab, crab, and then whoever wants his crabs would run downstairs and get the, there are sometimes people who did not want to walk down the stairs, and sometimes maybe the crab man did not want to walk up the stairs, so somebody would send a basket with a long string, and then you just put the money in there for $1, $2, whatever you want, and then the guy would put in the crabs, and then you just pull up the basket.
And he used to ring the bell, and he'd go, golly, golly!
And I think the rag man would do that. I don't know if he had a bell, but he'd yell, rags, rags.
No, and the crab guy was like, and it's funny because I knew this friend of mine who was Irish when he came into the West End, and I went over to his house and we were talking. She says, "You know what I miss the most?" And this is his mother now. And I said, "No." She says, "The crab guy when he was coming down the street yelling, gully, gully."
Gully, gully.
She was living in Quincy, and it was just like so quiet out there.
Yeah.
She sort of confusing.
I don't know if it's a case of over nostalgia or something, but it seems to me that the food at that time was really fabulous. I remember a bakery at the corner of Cotting and Leverett Street. Pinto.
Yeah, those.
I mean, his eclairs and cannoli were fabulous.
Yeah.
And he liked to whistle too,
Oh.
Sometimes he would officiate at weddings, and he would start whistling.
There was the other bakery. There was an Italian bakery on Green Street too.
Green Street, I don't remember that.
Yeah, it came later. I mean, it was Pinto's was there a little bit longer than they were, but like from about 1952 or 50 or somewhere in there, they put an Italian bakery in there.
Okay, because I have
It was
very
sort of near Consolo's. You know where Consolo's was, the fish place?
fish.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I remember where
It was
that
in that era.
Not too far
area.
from the corner of Stanford and Green.
Right. It was in that area somewhere.
Yeah.
Okay, it was between like Stanford and Leverett. On the other side, on the Consolo side.
Okay.
In that block somewhere, there was. I mean, it was relatively new. Of course, on the other hand, you had Godfrey's, the Jewish
I'm
one.
crazy about Godfrey's.
Yeah.
Because I used to live on Prospect Street, 23 Prospect Street,
Yeah.
and my street was just, I don't know, maybe 100, 150 feet away, maybe less, from the back of Godfrey's. So I used to watch them make the jellies, and I know exactly how they made them.
When they were in the middle of the block, or when they were on the end of the block.
Oh, the end. They were below. You remember Shapiro's Liquor?
Yeah. Yeah, right next door to that.
Maybe 2 or 3 doorsteps down
Right.
on the right-hand side going toward the North Station.
Okay. Yeah, those.
And I flipped over those jelly donuts, and every now and then they'd give me one.
Then they moved down to the corner where the horse trough was.
Oh, I remember the Hofstra, yeah.
They were right on the corner of Causeway and whatever that's Stanford Street.
Yes.
They were down there at the end. It was a little different. And I'll tell you the truth. I remember the old woman in there, right? And you're walking in, she'd go, "You want a geladona?"
Well, I remember Silver Bakery on the corner of Poplar, your street,
yeah.
Poplar and Spring.
Yeah. Well, they just did a story 2 months ago. The Christos, which was right across from.
Yeah.
Sent in a picture.
Oh, that's right. Krista was across from them, right?
Right. And I think it was Mary Adams, if I remember right. Sent in a picture with her sisters. And they sent in, they were talking about Christos and the way,
Yeah.
I mean, Silver's Bakery
Yeah.
and the way it was.
It was, no kidding. People talk about how the West End was a polyglot community, a little bit of everything. But, it really was a little bit of everything.
Well, you got to remember the history of it, okay? Up until about 1900, 1905, it was largely an Irish community, okay? I mean, most of it was Irish. And then, around 1905 to about 1920, maybe 1925, became largely Jewish.
Yes.
So there was that. And when I say largely, nobody ever was like 90%. I'm talking about.
Yeah, sure.
It was
Yeah.
The good, most of, we'll say 45, 50%.
Yes.
And then around 1930, 32, it started becoming largely Italian. Okay?
Heavily
And-
Italian.
Yeah. And afterwards, when they were ready to tear the West End down, we were getting Polish people. And matter of fact,
sure.
And we were getting a lot of people, they used to call them DPs, displaced persons.
Yeah.
And they were the displaced
Yeah.
persons. Mayor, who was a German kid, moved in. We had Ukrainian kids moving in.
Yes.
I think if the West End had stayed up another 10 years or so,
Yeah.
right, we would have had a large, we'll say, Eastern European
Yes,
population.
yeah.
Okay, we would have expanded out. I mean, not that. I mean, a lot of the Jewish community were Eastern European, but I'm talking
Sure.
about non-Jewish Eastern Europeans. It would have.
Yeah.
It would have developed into that.
Yeah.
We probably should go into. You brought some great pictures for the museum, and
I thought you might be able to use it for the museum and or the newspaper.
well, we'll do a little bit of both. Now, this is one. Could you explain that?
Well, I was in the Army back in 1953, and this picture I recall was taken, I believe, in June outside St. Joseph's Church on Chambers Street, and she was not my wife then, but Josephine Vitale,
Right.
and we married about 4 months later on November of '53. I was in the Army, and I was stationed at Dick's, and I came home for the weekend, and my mother is in the middle.
Right.
And it's sort of funny because I didn't start growing until I was about 14, and before I grew, my mother was a head taller than I, and here I am, a head taller than she.
Right.
But anyway, I remember this picture very well. I even remember the color of my wife's dress. I think it was
Talking
blue.
about your mother.
Oh, when my mother came to the United States, she actually had, just like in the picture, the Godfather would have these tags on you. She had this tag, and she was on the White Star Line, the SS Cretic or Cretic, I don't know how to pronounce it, C-R-E-T-I-C. It even has the date, 22 December 1919. Her number on the manifest, or the sheet of passengers, the list of passengers, is number 49, and it has her name here, Darigo Giuseppa. Giuseppa is the female correlative of Giuseppe, so if the name was Giuseppe, that would be Joseph in Italian, but if it's Josephine in Italian, they say Giuseppa, and her maiden name was Darigo before she married my father. And this is, well, it's really precious. She's been dead for, 32 years, but I'd like the museum, if you have room,
Oh, yeah.
I'd like the museum to have that.
It will all be. What we have to do is like categorize it and
I see.
figure out how we're going to show it. We will show all these things.
I feel
And this is a family portrait.
I feel probably closer to this picture here than any picture I have, and I have thousands and thousands of pictures at home. This shows my family with all my brothers and sisters, with the exception of my oldest sister named Mary and my oldest brother named Joe, because my real name is Santo,
Right.
and most people call me Santo, some people call me Joe. At any rate, around I think it was 1936 or 37, we went to a photo studio in the North End, and we took this picture. And I guess everybody always likes to not smile, so I don't think anybody is smiling there except one of
in those days, yeah. It was,
So there's 8 children there present, and my mother and father. My mother, of course, is seated, and my father, his first name was Arma, A-R-M-A, sort of a straight, probably a diminutive Armando, I don't know. But he was a very interesting fellow, loved to tell stories, and I have many good memories of him, and also my mother, a warm person, and we had a lot of fun. So anyway, I was the youngest of 10 children. So there I am in the lower left, and and that little kid over there, and my father was very prolific, as I say. 10 children is quite a bit.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, some people have died. Well, no wonder. I'm the youngest of 10, and
I'm the youngest
70.
of 9 myself.
Youngest
There's only
of
3
9.
of us left.
Wow. And, well, these things, necessarily, of course, happen. And but they've had a rather interesting life. Those who have gone on before us.
And we have some other ones. We'll get to. Let's see what else we have here. I guess this is. Who's that?
Oh, this is fascinating. This is my father when he was in the Italian Navy. And I figure this was around 1907, if not 1906. And he was either 19 or 20 years old. And he had such, look at the hair, he got like a pompadour, or what do they call it, Marcel, great big hair. And they would always like to pose on something.
Oh, yeah,
you know,
in those days, yeah. You remember when the wife always had her hand on it, the father was sitting there and the wife had her hand on his.
Oh, this is interesting. My wife, Josephine, her maiden name is Vitali. She lived on Ashland Street, 15 Ashland Street. I didn't know it. I lived at one point at 18 Ashland Street, across the street. This is she when she was 3 years old, and she was an angel in a North End parade.
Yeah.
And so there she is, and it's a beautiful photograph.
Yeah, very nice, very, very nice. Okay, and
oh yeah.
we'll get to this one.
Oh yes. Well, actually, these are my. This is my mother, and this is her sister.
Yeah.
Well, this is my mother, Giuseppa, or
Right.
Josephine, and this is her sister, Camilla.
Right.
This is her brother, Gaetano, and this is her mother and father. And their last name, his last name, grandpa, grandma, Darigo, D''A''R''I''G''O.
Any
Darigo.
relation to there was a Patty DeRigo in the West End?
No, none here, as far as
Okay.
I know. No relations.
Okay, and I guess this is your dad again.
Well, this is interesting because a lot of these people really did take photographs on the roof.
That's right. We've just, in the last newsletter, we had a couple.
Okay, that's right.
Yeah.
And this was taken on the top of our apartment on Chambers Street, I recall. Well, actually, I wasn't even born then, but from what I remember. And this was, well, that must have been next to the chimney. Yeah, that looks like a chimney there. My goodness, this is a long time ago, this picture. I think it was oh, my goodness, it was before I was born. It had to be 1927.
Okay. And I think that.
Oh, yeah, and I think the last picture there,
Yeah.
this is interesting. I went to the St. Joseph Parochial School. So many of us
Right,
did.
I did too myself.
And I graduated in 1946, but
I
because
was
of my...
54.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, because of my size there, I don't even remember the parade, but anyway.
It was probably a May procession or something.
Yeah, they used to love those May
Right.
and I liked being in it. But anyway, I didn't... Evidently, I must have helped carry that flag. That was, I figure, 1942. And this is my buddy at the time, Edwin Antonius. He's much, much taller than I. But he was in the same grade as I.
Right.
Unfortunately, passed away. But he also lived, he was the fellow who lived on Poplar Street, right? Almost
Like
across
I
the street
said,
from you.
I knew Joey.
But look, we had sashes, and it says St. Joe's, and the parade. A lot of memories.
Well, you know what got me about St. Joseph's? After the war, a lot of the stuff stopped. Because used to talk to the old timers, like the people that used to be with the Hendricks Club and, the old time West Enders. And St. Joseph's used to have a vibrant, they had a band. They used to run plays they had like, theatrical component.
I can mention a couple of interesting things about St. Joe's that a lot of people may not know. They had St. Joseph Boys School for Boys across the little alley, and then St. Joseph School for Girls across the other side of the alley. and the St. Joseph School for Girls was nearer to the church and the rectory.
Right.
Now, that St. Joseph School for Girls used to be the Boston Lying In Hospital, and then they subsequently moved to Longwood Ave.
Right.
And later on, I didn't even know this until recently, they merged the two schools. Where they put them, I don't know. I think they went into the
this is what
boys'
happened,
school.
because I originally started in the boys' school.
Okay.
The boys' school was right on that little alley.
Yes.
On Allen, not at McLean Street. And what they did, I went to the first grade there.
Right.
Okay, but what they did, they bought the old Wells School. Remember Wells? If you went down the street
corner,
on the corner,
Blossom.
they bought that, and they moved both.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
They moved
So
the boys
so
and the girls into the old Wells School.
Oh, okay.
And we had that big schoolyard and everything that went with it.
That's right.
What I remember about the girls' school was those big ionic columns that went. I think they were ionic, if I remember right. That went all the way up, and I never realized that it was like that because it was a hospital. They tore that down. You know that's historic.
Oh, yeah,
Just the way the building was built. I mean, just that was probably one of the finest examples of whatever you want to call it.
Revival, possibly.
Revival.
You know?
I don't remember exactly. Yeah, because
Yeah.
I have a vague memory of what it was. All I remember is these massive columns.
I remember that.
There was about 4 or 5 of them going across the front porch,
And I can say something about St. Joseph Church. That used to be a Protestant church.
Oh, yeah.
And then it was bought by the Catholic diocese.
1864.
Okay, 1864. And later on, maybe 30 years after that, who was one of the rectors, or one of the little priests?
Pastor.
Well, not the pastor, but Cardinal O'Connell.
He was the pastor.
He became pastor too?
Yep. When he was a pastor, I think it was he bought some property. I think he bought the property behind the building.
Really?
So, you know those remember behind where the
Yes, there was a rectory.
I mean,
so
St.
forth.
Joseph, everything is still there. St. Joseph's Father Gabe Troy is still the pastor there.
Okay.
He took over when Father Buck died, and Buck and Father Buck and Father Troy, right, are great guys. They've been very instrumental with the West End.
Very few buildings, as you know, left in the West End. You have MGH, the Charlestown, not the Charlestown prison, the Child Street prison, the West End house.
Yep, which is now part of the hospital.
Yeah, and then the Harrison Gray Otis house, I think the second house, and the rectory of St. Joe's and St. Joe's.
And there's 2 buildings behind the Otis Gray house. There's two tenements that were kept when they took West End down. Yeah, they became part of the Otis Gray.
That's about all I can remember.
And there's a couple down at the end by the Charles Street Jail. There's one on Lomasney Way now.
Well, talking about Lomasney,
right.
I remember reading something when I was doing my research a long time ago. A Harvard professor wrote that Lomasney had the most incredible political group, and he was like the most powerful political boss in the world, and I thought you'd get a kick out of that.
Well, him and Curly, okay, were fought with each other. They weren't friends. They were the two powers of that time. Anyway, so I guess that being as it may, I think it's probably time for us we've gotten the signal, we're going off now. So I guess we'll see you at the next West End Video Newsletter.